well.
You know, I was in the 2008 leaders debates, and of course, Mr. Harper, Mr. Prime Minister, we were the two who were there, and I recall very clearly that Mr. Harper was still talking about if there's going to be a recession, we'd be in one already. I don't really think that he's got a good track record on spotting when this country is in a recession. We're in a recession now. We have a weak and shrinking economy, and it's the wrong time for austerity measures. We need to build up Canada's economy through investment. And right now, there's no investment going on. There hasn't been investment for the last 2 or 3 years, not from the private sector that's sitting on $630 billion of what Mark Carney called the dead money. We need to make sure that this economy doesn't sputter to a halt. And that, if we stay with Mr. Harper's risky plans, that's where we're headed.
There is no reason pensioners should believe your change of story on this one.
With all due respect, Mr. Prime Minister, you are cherry-picking your data. Net new jobs as an indicator of the health of our economy isn't relevant when comparing it to other G7 nations unless you correct for population growth. And comparing us to Germany, for instance, where they don't have new people joining the labor market constantly, compared to other economies in the G7, we are doing very poorly indeed. We are in a recession under your watch for the second time.
The next question goes to Elizabeth May from the Green Party. Ms. May, the Green Party's policies call for a transformation of the Canadian economy from resource exports to high value-added business. But that's a long-term project, and Canada is facing trouble right now. What can the federal government do now, this year, to reanimate the economy?
Excellent question. I think we have to also bear in mind and keep in context that the oil sands are about 2% of our GDP. We've got a lot of economic activity. The Prime Minister's right. We're seeing other sectors begin to rebound and able to export. Our dollar shouldn't keep declining. I think this is a source of worry. But we can't just sit back and think that the current stagnant economy is going to fix itself. We need investment. We need investment from the public sector. We need to invest in a climate action plan. Frankly, we need an army of carpenters, electricians, and contractors going out to plug leaky buildings. That's 30% of carbon pollution comes from the energy we waste and the money we waste heating the outdoors in the winter and cooling it in the summer. And we also need to invest in municipal infrastructure. That infrastructure deficit is $123 billion. We need to get at it as our bridges and roads are crumbling.
Can you recruit your army of carpenters and without jeopardizing budget balance? How important is budget balance in the scheme of things?
In the scheme of things, not very. In a $2 trillion economy, and I would differ with all due respect to the Prime Minister, we are not going to see a balanced budget this year. The Parliamentary Budget Office just put out its new figures, but I wouldn't condemn them. And in my pre-budget advice to Finance Minister Joe Oliver, I said, really, this fixation on balancing the budget is being driven by the political imperative that the Conservatives created by saying in the last election, we'll give you all these goodies once we balance the budget. This year, they monkeyed with the budget. They put it out on April 21st, not because they needed to know where oil was going, but because they wanted to book the sale of the General Motors shares in the next fiscal year. So we sold 73 million shares in General Motors. Was that a good policy choice? I don't know, but fiddling with the books so that that showed in this year's budget to help fake a balance, and then the price of oil keeps dropping. We're not going to see a balanced budget, but I don't condemn them for that. It's far more serious that $150 billion of federal debt has been accumulated under this Prime Minister.
Canada's largest corporations are not paying their fair share, and yes, the NDP will bring up their taxes slightly.
And absolutely right, Mr. Mulcair, because when Jim Flaherty, and late and lamented, but when he cut those corporate taxes, he said these corporations were, in his words, the job creators. Well, they've sat on that money. That's why Mark Carney called it the dead money. $630 billion in cash, an astonishing 32% of Canada's GDP is sitting stagnant, not being used. It's absolutely appropriate to raise the corporate tax rate to about where it was in 2009. It would still be very competitive within OECD countries, and we should do it as quickly as possible so we have money to invest in getting the economy moving again. Mr. Prime Minister, you made a promise in the speech from the throne in 2007 that you would tackle the barriers to trade and labor mobility within this country as an economic union. And it's squarely your responsibility. You said you would go to the Trade and Commerce Clause of the Constitution if needed to be. And now here we are as a country. We have more barriers to trade within Canada than the 28 nation states of the European Union. Why, over this period of time, where is your plan to break down the trade barriers within Canada?
The problem Mr. Harper has on that one is he simply refuses refused to sit down and talk with the premiers over the past 10 years. It's just not showing leadership.
And with all due respect, your foothold in Asia was to sell us down the river on national sovereignty. You've bound this country without a single set of hearings in Parliament to a trade, not a trade deal, an investment treaty with China that binds us until the year 2045, and we can't get out of it. We need to insist on transparency because Beijing's going to be looking over the shoulder of the next prime minister and telling us what laws we're allowed to pass.